I need to tell you about something that happened to me 6 months ago, and I'm still not sure if I should be sharing this. But I can't carry it alone anymore. The weight of what I saw, what I learned, what I was asked to keep secret, it's crushing me. So I'm going to tell you everything, and then you can decide what to believe. My name is David Brennan. I'm 31 years old, and I work as a freelance journalist, mostly covering environmental issues and indigenous rights in the Pacific Northwest. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that I approach stories with skepticism and a commitment to facts. I don't sensationalize. I don't invent details for clicks. What I'm about to tell you is exactly what happened, as accurately as I can remember it. Last October, I was working on a story about illegal logging operations on the border between Washington State and British Columbia. I'd been following leads for weeks, talking to rangers and environmental activists, trying to piece together evidence of systematic violations on protected land. That's how I ended up in a tiny town, I won't name it, about 40 miles south of the Canadian border. The town was barely a town at all. Maybe 200 people, a general store, a gas station, and a diner that looked like it had been frozen in time since the 1960s. I was staying at the only motel, a row of 6 cabins that hadn't been updated since they were built, conducting interviews during the day and compiling notes at night. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. If you're watching this, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I know this seems like a strange time to ask, but I need to know people are hearing this story. I need to know that if something happens to me, there's a record of what I learned. So please, take a second and subscribe. It's more important than you realize. On my 4th day in town, I was having breakfast at the diner when an older man approached my table. He was Native American, probably in his 70s, with long gray hair pulled back in a braid and deep lines etched into his face like roads on a map. He wore jeans, work boots, and a flannel jacket despite the warmth of the diner. "You're the journalist," he said. Not a question, a statement. "That's right, David Brennan." I gestured to the empty seat across from me. "Would you like to sit?" He studied me for a long moment with eyes that were sharp and evaluating despite his age. Finally, he sat down. "My name is Joseph Whitebear. I'm Lummi, born on the reservation near Bellingham. I've been watching you ask questions around town. I'm working on a story about illegal logging. I know what you're working on. That's not why I'm here." He folded his hands on the table, his expression serious. "You ask a lot of questions about the forest, about the land, about things people have seen out there that they can't explain. That got my attention. During my interviews, several people had made vague references to strange occurrences in the woods, sounds that shouldn't exist, tracks that didn't match any known animal, areas where even experienced hunters refused to go. I'd noted them as color for the story, but hadn't pursued them seriously. "I'm interested in anything people want to share," I said carefully. Joseph nodded slowly. "I have something to show you. Something that relates to your story, but not in the way you think. Something that's been hidden for a very long time, and maybe it's time someone outside our community knows about it." "I'm listening." "Not here." He glanced around the diner at the few other patrons eating their breakfasts. "If you want to see it, you come with me. Today. And you agree to some conditions first." I should have been more cautious. Meeting strange men in isolated areas isn't exactly journalist safety protocol. But there was something about Joseph Whitebear that felt trustworthy, solid. And I'd been chasing this logging story for weeks without a breakthrough. If he had something relevant to show me, I couldn't pass it up. "What conditions?" I asked. "You don't bring your camera. You don't bring recording equipment. You can bring a notebook and pen, but you write down only what I give you permission to write. And you don't share what you learn without thinking very carefully about the consequences. This isn't a story you can just publish without understanding what it means." Every journalistic instinct I had was screaming that these were red flags. But curiosity won out. "Agreed. Then meet me at the gas station in 1 hour. Bring water, sturdy shoes, and an open mind." He stood up, leaving before I could ask any more questions. I went back to my motel room and packed a day bag. Water bottles, protein bars, my notebook, and a handful of pens, a flashlight, a first aid kit. I left my camera and voice recorder behind as promised, though it felt wrong. I texted my editor the name of the man I was meeting and where I was going, basic safety protocol, and then drove to the gas station. Joseph was waiting in an old Chevy pickup that had clearly seen better decades. I climbed in, and we headed east, deeper into the forest. He didn't speak, and I didn't push him. We drove on paved roads for about 20 minutes, then turned onto a logging road that was barely maintained. The truck bounced and rattled over ruts and rocks, branches scraping the sides as we pushed deeper into the woods. After another 30 minutes, Joseph pulled off the logging road onto what was barely a track. Two faint lines in the undergrowth where vegetation had been compressed by tires at some point in the distant past. We crawled forward at walking speed for maybe a mile, and then he stopped. "We walk from here," he said. I followed him into the forest. The trees here were old growth, massive Douglas firs and western red cedars that blocked out most of the sunlight, creating a perpetual twilight at ground level. The air was cool and damp, rich with the smell of moss and rotting wood and living green things. It was beautiful and slightly eerie in the way old forests always are, like walking through a cathedral built by time rather than human hands. Joseph moved with the confidence of someone who'd walked this path 1,000 times, though I couldn't see any path. He navigated around fallen logs, through patches of sword ferns, past massive tree trunks. I followed, trying to remember landmarks in case I needed to find my way back alone, but everything looked the same, beautiful, ancient, and slightly disorienting. We walked for almost an hour, just when my legs were starting to ache, and I was wondering how much farther we had to go. Joseph stopped. He held up a hand, signaling me to wait, and then he spoke. Not to me, but to the forest itself. He spoke in a language I didn't understand, Lummi, I assumed, his voice low and respectful. It sounded like a greeting or maybe a request for permission. He was quiet for a moment, listening to something I couldn't hear. Then he nodded and turned to me. "Stay close. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch anything. And remember, you asked to see this. What happens next is because you chose to come here." "I understand," I said, though I didn't. "Not yet." Joseph pushed through a thick stand of salal bushes, and I followed. On the other side, hidden completely from view by the vegetation, was a structure. It was a cabin, but calling it that almost doesn't do it justice. It was built entirely from logs, massive cedar logs that must have been harvested from the oldest trees in the forest. The construction was ancient, held together with wooden pegs rather than nails. The joints fitted so precisely that I couldn't see gaps between the logs. The roof was covered in moss and small plants, making it blend almost seamlessly with the forest. If Joseph hadn't led me directly to it, I could have walked past it a dozen times without seeing it. But what struck me most was how wrong it felt. The cabin radiated a sense of otherness that I can't quite explain. It wasn't threatening exactly, but it was definitely not welcoming. The windows, there were two, small and covered with what looked like scraped hide rather than glass, seemed to watch like eyes. The door, made from a single massive plank, was closed but somehow gave the impression of being barely restrained, like it might burst open at any moment. "This cabin has been here for more than 300 years, Joseph said quietly. "My ancestors found it when they first came to this area. It was already old then, already occupied. Occupied? By who? By what, not who?" Joseph approached the cabin slowly, respectfully. "The stories say this cabin marks a boundary, a place where two worlds touch. The human world and the world of the spirits, the old ones, the things that were here before us and will be here after we're gone." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool forest air. "Joseph, what are we doing here? You ask questions about the forest, about things people have seen, about why certain areas are avoided." He turned to look at me. "This is why. This cabin and what lives inside it is the reason. It's the guardian, the keeper of the boundary. And it's been here, watching and waiting, for longer than any of us can remember." "What lives inside?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "The stories call it by many names. GOATMAN is one, though that's not quite accurate. It's not a man with a goat's features. It's something that was never human, that chose a form that would be familiar enough not to be completely incomprehensible. Joseph stepped up to the cabin door. It's aware, intelligent. It understands our language, though it rarely speaks. It tolerates our presence in its forest, but only because we've maintained the agreement our ancestors made. What agreement? That we respect the boundary. We don't cut the old trees in this area. We don't hunt certain animals. We don't bring outsiders here without good reason. And in return, it stays in its cabin. It watches, but doesn't interfere. It keeps other things, worse things, from crossing over. This was insane. Academic, rational David was screaming that this was folklore mythology, stories told to keep people away from a dangerous area or to preserve old-growth forest. But I was standing in front of a cabin that shouldn't exist, built with techniques that predated modern tools, hidden so completely that it couldn't be found without a guide. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Because the agreement is breaking down. The logging companies, the ones you're investigating, they're getting closer to this area. They don't know what they're approaching, what boundary they're about to cross. And if they violate this place, if they come here with their machines and their disrespect, Joseph's jaw tightened. It will respond. And people will die. Not just the loggers, but anyone in the area. Maybe everyone in the town. Then we need to stop them. We need to get this land protected. How? By telling the government that a spirit creature lives in a hidden cabin and will kill people if they disturb its forest. Joseph shook his head. No one will believe that. But maybe, if you see it, if you witness what I'm telling you is true, you can find another way. You can write about the old-growth forest, the ecological importance, the historical sites. You can create protection without revealing the real reason it needs to be protected. Before I could respond, something moved inside the cabin. I heard it clearly, the creak of floorboards, the sound of something large shifting its weight. And then I smelled it, a scent that was both familiar and utterly alien, something like wet fur and wood smoke and wild herbs, but underneath that was something else, something that made my hindbrain scream danger. Joseph spoke again in that language I didn't understand. His voice was respectful but firm, the tone of someone addressing an equal rather than something to be feared or worshipped. He spoke for maybe 30 seconds, and then he was quiet, waiting. The door didn't open, but I heard a response from inside the cabin, a sound that was partly animal, partly something else. It was deep and resonant, with a quality that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Not words exactly, but clearly communication, an acknowledgement. Joseph turned to me. It has agreed to show itself. But remember what I told you. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch anything. Show respect. The door began to open. Slowly, deliberately, like whatever was inside wanted us to see it emerge. The hinges, wooden ancient, made no sound despite their obvious age. And then I saw it. I'm going to describe what I saw as accurately as I can, but I need you to understand that my brain was fighting against the information my eyes were providing. What I was looking at shouldn't exist, couldn't exist according to everything I knew about biology and evolution and the natural world. But it was there, solid and undeniable. It stood in the doorway of a cabin, and it was massive. At least 7 feet tall, maybe more, with a build that was powerful and unsettling in its wrongness. The body was roughly humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, an upright posture, but the proportions were off. The legs were too thick, too muscular, and they bent in a way that was almost, but not quite human. They ended in hooves, actual cloven hooves, dark and polished, that clicked softly on the wooden floor of the cabin. The torso was broad and covered in fur, dark brown, almost black in the shadows, with lighter patches on the chest and shoulders. But it wasn't like any fur I'd seen on any animal. It had a quality that was almost like feathers, layered and textured in a way that suggested something between mammal and bird. The arms were long, extending past where human knees would be, and ended in hands that were a nightmarish hybrid of human and animal. 5 fingers, clearly articulated and opposable, but covered in that same strange fur and tipped with thick, dark nails that were somewhere between claws and hooves. But it was the head that made my breath stop in my chest and my legs go weak. The skull structure was elongated, like a goat or a deer, with a pronounced snout and jaw. Two horns, thick, curved, ridged, emerged from the top of the skull and swept back over what might have been ears, though they were partially hidden in the fur. The eyes were positioned forward like a predator's, and they were the most disturbing thing about the entire appearance. They were intelligent. Unmistakably, undeniably intelligent. Not animal intelligence, not even primate intelligence. These were the eyes of something that thought, that reasoned, that understood in ways that might exceed human capacity. They were amber-colored, almost golden, with pupils that were horizontal slits like a goat's. And they were looking directly at me with an intensity that felt like being X-rayed. Stop right now and leave a comment. Tell me, what would you do in this moment? Would you run? Would you speak? Would you try to rationalize what you're seeing? Because I need to know I'm not the only one who would freeze completely, unable to move or think or even breathe properly. Comment below, because what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the world. The creature, I'm going to call it that because I don't have a better word, stepped out of the cabin. Its movements were fluid and eerily graceful, despite its size and unusual proportions. Those hooves made soft clicking sounds on the ground, and I could see now that it wasn't entirely covered in fur. Parts of its body, particularly around the joints and on the hands and face, showed skin that was leathery and dark, like old wood. It stood perhaps 10 feet away from us, close enough that I could see every detail, smell that complex scent more strongly, hear the deep, steady rhythm of its breathing. It looked at Joseph first, and something passed between them, not words, but recognition. The acknowledgement of a long-standing relationship, one built on mutual respect and maintained agreements. Then it turned its full attention to me, and I felt the weight of that gaze like a physical pressure. Those amber eyes looked at me, into me, through me. I had the unsettling sensation that it was reading not just my surface thoughts, but my history, my intentions, my essential nature, judging whether I was worth this revelation, whether I could be trusted with what I was seeing. I don't know how long we stood like that. Time felt distorted, unreliable. It might have been 30 seconds or 5 minutes. All I knew was that I couldn't look away, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stand there and be examined by something that had no right to exist. Finally, it spoke. Not in the language Joseph had used, and not in English. The sounds it made were deep and complex, with harmonics that seemed to resonate in my bones. But somehow, impossibly, I understood the meaning. Not the words, there were no words, but the intent behind the communication. It was asking me a question. Why should I trust you? I looked at Joseph, desperate for guidance, but he just nodded slightly. This was my moment to respond. My choice. My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again. I'm trying to protect the forest. The old trees. Your territory. Not because I knew you were here, but because it's the right thing to do. The creature tilted its head, a gesture that was disturbingly bird-like. It made another sound, and again I understood the meaning. Many say such things. Few act on them when it costs them something. I know, but I'm asking you to give me a chance. Let me try. I was speaking to a mythological creature that shouldn't exist, negotiating like we were discussing a business deal. The absurdity of it would have made me laugh if I hadn't been so terrified. The creature's eyes narrowed slightly, and it stepped closer. I had to force myself not to back away, not to show fear, even though every instinct was screaming at me to run. It reached out with one of those hybrid hands, and I could see now that despite the claws and fur, the structure underneath was remarkably similar to a human hand. The fingers were long and articulated, the joints functioning with precision that suggested fine motor control. It didn't touch me, but it held its hand out, palm up, in a gesture that was unmistakably human. An offering, an invitation. Joseph spoke quietly. It's asking if you're willing to make an agreement. A formal one, witnessed and binding. What kind of agreement? That you'll protect this place and the territory around it. That you'll use your voice, your platform, your influence to keep the destruction away. And in return, it will tolerate your knowledge of its existence. It will allow you to leave here alive with what you've learned. And if I break the agreement, Joseph's expression was grim. Then it will come for you. No matter where you are, no matter how far you run. The boundary works both ways. If it needs to cross over to enforce the agreement, it will. I looked at that extended hand, at those intelligent amber eyes, at the impossible creature standing in front of me in the shadowed forest. I thought about the logging companies, about the machinery pushing closer to this hidden place, about the destruction that would come if no one stood in the way. I agree, I said. The creature's hand closed around mine, and the sensation was like nothing I'd ever experienced. The fur was coarse but not unpleasant, the skin beneath warm and surprisingly human in its texture. But it was the pressure that struck me, not physically threatening, but firm, final, like signing a contract in something more permanent than ink. It held my hand for perhaps 3 seconds, and in that moment I felt something change inside me. Not painful, but profound, like something had been marked or sealed or altered at a level I couldn't quite identify. When it released my hand and stepped back, I knew with absolute certainty that the agreement was real, that it was binding, and that breaking it would have consequences I couldn't begin to imagine. The creature looked at Joseph and made another sound, brief, almost perfunctory. A dismissal or a farewell. Then it turned and walked back into the cabin. The door closed behind it with a soft thud, and just like that, it was gone. I stood there shaking, my hand still tingling from where it had touched mine. Joseph put a hand on my shoulder, steadying me. "You did well," he said quietly. "Most people can't speak at all when they see it for the first time. Some can't stop screaming. What is it?" "Really, I told you. A guardian. A keeper of boundaries. One of the old ones." Joseph started walking back toward where we'd left the truck. "My ancestors called them the first people. They say these beings were here before humans, that they shaped the land and established the rules that keep the world separate. Most of them left or died out as humans spread. But a few remained, in hidden places, maintaining their watch. Why did it agree to show itself to me? Because the situation is desperate. The logging companies are a week away from reaching this territory. Maybe less. Without legal protection, without someone raising alarm, they'll come here with their machines. They'll cut the old trees. They'll disturb the cabin. And the GOATMAN, Joseph used the English word with a slight grimace, like it was insufficient but functional. It will have no choice but to defend its territory. A lot of people will die. We walked in silence for a while, retracing our path through the old-growth forest. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd seen, what I'd agreed to. I'd made a deal with something that shouldn't exist to protect a place that couldn't be protected through normal means. How do I do this? I asked finally. How do I protect this area without explaining why it really needs to be protected? You're a journalist. You know how to tell stories that matter. You find the angle that works: endangered species, historical significance, ecological importance. You make people care about saving it for reasons they can understand. Joseph glanced back at me. You have tools the creature doesn't. Words, media, the ability to reach thousands of people. Use them. We reached the truck as the sun was starting to set, painting the forest in shades of gold and amber. On the drive back to town, Joseph gave me details, locations of particularly old trees, information about species that lived in the area, stories about indigenous sites that predated European contact. Material I could use to build a case for protection without mentioning the real guardian that lived there. When he dropped me off at my motel, he handed me a piece of paper with a phone number. "If you need more information, call me." But David, he held my gaze. "Remember the agreement. The GOATMAN doesn't make idle threats. If you fail, if you give up, if you decide the story isn't worth the trouble, it will know. And it will come." I spent the next 3 months working on the story like my life depended on it. Because maybe it did. I researched every angle, interviewed dozens of experts, compiled evidence of ecological importance and historical significance. I wrote article after article, pitched the story to every major publication I could think of. I testified at county meetings and state hearings. I became an expert on that specific stretch of forest, that particular ecosystem. And it worked. 6 weeks ago, the State Environmental Board designated the area as protected wilderness. The logging permits were revoked. The companies pulled out, moving their operations to less controversial territories. The forest and the cabin hidden within it were safe. I should have felt relieved. Mission accomplished, agreement fulfilled. But I don't feel relief. I feel watched. Every time I'm alone, every time I'm in a quiet place, I sense something observing me. Not threatening, not hostile, but present. Aware. Making sure I remember what I promised. 2 weeks ago, I dreamed about the cabin. In the dream, I was standing in front of it again, and the door was open. The goatman stood in the doorway, those amber eyes fixed on me. It didn't speak, didn't move. Just watched. And when I woke up, my hand, the one it had touched, was tingling like it had fallen asleep. I think it was a reminder. A gentle one, but a reminder nonetheless. The agreement is ongoing. The forest is protected now, but protection requires maintenance, vigilance, making sure the boundaries stay in place and people continue to respect them. I'm telling you this story because Joseph was right. Someone outside the community needed to know. Someone needed to understand that there are things in the world that can't be explained by science or rationality, that predate our civilization and will outlast it. Someone needed to witness what I witnessed. But I'm also telling you this as a warning. There are boundaries we shouldn't cross, places we shouldn't disturb, agreements that were made long before we were born that we ignore at our peril. The world is stranger and more complex than we like to believe, and the things that live in the hidden places are real, whether we acknowledge them or not. The goatman is still there, in its cabin deep in the old-growth forest, still watching, still guarding, still maintaining the boundary between the human world and whatever lies beyond it. And now I'm bound to it, tied by an agreement I made with something that shouldn't exist. I haven't been back to that town. I haven't spoken to Joseph Whitebear since the protection was granted. But I think about the cabin constantly. I think about those intelligent amber eyes and that hybrid hand closing around mine. I think about what it told me through means that bypassed language entirely. Protect this place, and I will tolerate your knowledge of me. Break this agreement, and I will find you. I believe it. I believe every word, every implied threat, every aspect of that impossible conversation. Because I felt it when we touched. I felt the reality of the agreement being sealed into something deeper than law or contract. I felt myself being marked by something ancient and powerful and utterly inhuman. So I keep working. I keep watching the news for any threats to that protected area. I keep writing about conservation and environmental protection, not just for that one forest, but for all the hidden places where things we don't understand might be living, watching, waiting. Because now I know they're real. Now I know they're there. And now I know that we exist at their tolerance, not the other way around. Before I end this, I need you to do something. Hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel. And most importantly, comment below. Tell me if you've heard similar stories. Tell me if you've seen things in the forest that couldn't be explained. Tell me if you've ever felt watched by something that wasn't quite human, something intelligent and ancient and patient. Tell me I'm not the only one who knows the truth. Tell me I'm not alone in carrying this knowledge, in being bound by an agreement with something that lives in the spaces between our world and whatever lies beyond. Tell me that somewhere in the deep forests and hidden places, the old guardians are still watching, still maintaining the boundaries, still tolerating our presence in their ancient territories. Because if I'm wrong, if I imagine the whole thing, then I've lost my mind. But if I'm right, if the goatman is real, if the cabin exists, if the agreement is binding, then everything we think we know about the world is incomplete. Everything we believe about what's possible is too narrow. And there are things watching us from the shadows, things that were here first and will be here last, things that have agreed not to interfere with humanity as long as we respect the boundaries they've set. I've seen one of those things. I've touched it. I've made an agreement with it. And I live every day knowing that it's still there, still watching, still waiting to see if I'll keep my word. The cabin is real. The goatman is real. The boundary is real. And I'm bound to it now, for better or worse, for the rest of my life. Remember that the next time you're deep in an old forest, and you feel eyes on you that you can't quite locate, remember that some of those eyes might belong to something ancient, something that's watching and judging and deciding whether you're worth tolerating in its territory. Remember the cabin. Remember the guardian. Remember that there are agreements older than our civilization that still hold power. And remember that I'm still alive, still free, still able to tell this story only because I kept my word to something that lives between the human world and the wild places beyond our understanding. It's still there, still watching. And now so am I.